Good evening, everyone. Happy holidays. TJ here. So, usually during the holidays, I tend to do a lot of baking. Sometimes it's keto, sometimes it's just a little healthier, maybe half the sugar versus what it calls for in the recipe. And so, for this particular recipe, I am going to show you how to make a four ingredient, might be five depending on how sweet and spicy I'm feeling. So let's get started. So I will point my camera down, but you will hear me talking this whole time. Super simple. Takes about 10 minutes to put together. Takes about 12 minutes to bake, and then you want to set your oven for 350. And if you have a cookie sheet lined with either parchment paper or one of those silicone baking mats, that could be helpful too. Otherwise, you could just use aluminum foil or wax paper. All right, let's get started. All right, so pointing my camera down, hopefully you can see that fairly well. So for this particular recipe, the four ingredients are almond flour, vanilla, some sort of sweetener, whether you're choosing to use honey, syrup, something a little more natural. Otherwise, you could use regular sugar. Now, if you use regular sugar versus brown sugar gives you kind of a different texture of a cookie. Brown sugar can make something a little bit chewier, a little softer versus brown sugar or white sugar, my apologies, might make the cookie a little bit more on the crispy side. All right. So for this particular recipe, again, peanut butter, vanilla, almond flour, and then any sort of sweetener, syrup, or honey if you choose. All right. So for this, I've got 1 cup of peanut butter sitting at room temperature. And so I'm just going to scoop this out into my bowl. So you want to make sure that peanut butter is room temperature, easier to mix versus if it was coming out of the refrigerator. All right, so I did the best that I could with getting that peanut butter out of there. If you have a rubber scraper, you could always grab one of those too. I should probably do that actually. All right, so using my rubber scraper, which is going to make more sense in the long run as I'm mixing this. All right, that's a lot better. All right, so then for the next ingredient, let's do the sweetener. So using my glass measuring cup, not to use a dry measuring cup when doing liquids, just because they're slightly different. And then you always want to make sure that you set that glass container on the counter so that way you are measuring correctly and you're looking eye level. And so then this is going to go into our bowl. Awesome. All right. Trying to get everything in there. I'm one of these people where you have for me, watching cooking shows, and I know it's hard to kind of get everything out of a container, but it drives me nuts when I see all these leftover the ingredients still in a bowl. And so I'm like, just scrape it out. All right. So for the next one, so in here was 1 cup of peanut butter already, and then a half cup of the liquid sweetener or whatever. So I use syrup, and now it is 1 cup of almond flour. And just making sure that it's level. You don't want to pack it down because then you might get more almond flour than maybe you want, and maybe that kind of changes the recipe a little bit. So it's more of a lightly, a very loose, when you're putting it into the cup. So I just kind of shake it out, never tamp it down. So that is 1 cup of almond flour. So setting that aside, I will move that out of my way. All right, so for the last ingredient, for the 4 ingredient of our peanut butter cookies, is 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And that is the 4 ingredients for this particular cookie. Now there really is actually a 5th ingredient, which everyone should have, and you can either add it in, or you could just put it on top. And I will tell you what that is here in a second. All right, so from here we're going to mix this up, trying to incorporate all these ingredients together. And so as a reminder, setting that oven to 350. And this is going to bake for 12 minutes. All right, so that's what it looks like in the bowl. So it's all very incorporated together. I'm going to put my salt, which is the 5th ingredient, on top. If you want to put it in the batter, you can. Totally up to you. But I'm going to actually put it on top. Now, the 1 ingredient that I was telling you that you could add if you were feeling spicy, and I'm going to feel pretty spicy about adding this ingredient, and it's not a spice. But what goes well with peanut butter is obviously going to be something like dark chocolate chips. And so I'm just going to add just a 1/2 cup. And I will grab my 1/2 cup. And I'm going to dump that in. Chocolate and peanut butter were made for each other. All right. So after you incorporate everything together in the bowl, whether you've added the chocolate chips or not, you're just going to spoon out a little bit larger than maybe a golf ball, a little bit less. To be honest, this is the first time making this recipe, so I'm not sure how far they will spread out. So that's why I've only done 6 on this particular parchment or this baking pad. And so then the last part, again, completely optional if you're choosing to add this part, as I struggle to open this little tiny salt container that I have. All right, so you could use any sort of like flaked sea salt. I don't have the regular white, but what I think could be even more delicious is that I actually have a black sea salt. So I'm just going to actually sprinkle just a little bit on top of each cookie. And then we will get this in the oven. And we will see how it turns out. So again, just a little sprinkle. So this is going to go in the oven so you can see what that looks like. Looks nice. All right, so these are gonna bake for 12 minutes. And so I'm gonna set my timer. All right. So while that is baking, I'm just going to quickly talk about the recipe, why I picked that particular one for the holidays. And so, when we talk about like flour substitutions and we talk about trying to eat like a little healthier, doing a flour swap, in this case, using almond flour for like regular flour, You know that nuts have more fiber, they have more protein. You could use some other flour alternative, whether you were using like coconut flour. If you want to do regular flour, you could do like a rice flour or something that's more gluten free. So the difference with, flour substitutes is that they each can be a little different in their own way. And so, like, for example, with like a gluten free flour, if you are not gluten free, that sometimes eating gluten free, like the product itself tends to be drier. And so it doesn't have that same kind of like light, kind of moist consistency that maybe a regular flour would have. Versus, like, let's say, like an almond flour. And almond flour is going to have that fat. It is gluten free, um, but you get the added protein, the fiber, but the texture might be a little different. It might be a little more dense than a regular all purpose flour, or, maybe like a gluten free flour. So it, maybe doesn't crumble as well as like, a cake would with like a regular cake recipe. So the ratio with almond flour to regular flour is 1 to 1. So if you're going to substitute, let's say, gluten free flour for regular flour, that would be 1 to 1 as well. Now, if you were going to try something a little more bold, like let's say coconut flour, then it's more like a half cup to 1 cup of flour. And so then that slightly changes the recipe a little bit, and you could try that route as well. Now there are a lot of other flour alternatives out there as well, whether it's cassava flour, but then you start really getting into a specialized flour, and sometimes the issue with those specialized flours, even almond flour, is that they could be more expensive versus a regular flour. And so that's kind of a little bit of the trade off. But, eating a little healthier, especially during the holidays, you feel a little less guilty about eating those certain things. Which is nice to be able to have an alternative treat when it comes to being bombarded by, plates of cookies, and whether they're things that are made at home, or maybe someone did a cookie exchange, or maybe someone just gave you a plate of cookies and you're like, oh, what do I do with this? you know and so that's always kind of a challenge too. So that is the rundown of why I used almond flour versus like a regular flour, and this 4 ingredient peanut butter cookie. So we will wait till the timer goes off, and we'll see how these turned out, and wish me luck. Have a great day, everyone. Happy holidays. Bye.